Welcome to Healing Generations, a podcast creating a dialogue uplifting the importance of healing, strengthening, and supporting our communities, and that addresses the disparities and inequities in communities of color. Healing Generations is brought to you by the Healing Generations Institute, a collaborative initiative of the National Compadres Network and the Brotherhood of Elders. Be sure to subscribe to stay up to date on our new releases.
Welcome to the Healing Generation podcast. My name is Ariel Jimenez, and I will be your host for today's segment. We want to take a moment and welcome you, your family, and your communities to join us as we hear from some of our youth leaders. Throughout the year, we will get an opportunity to sit down and hear from our youth leaders from across the nation as they share about their experiences, the lessons they learned from those experiences, and the teachings that they have implemented within their lives. Today, you would actually get to hear from a familiar voice. We will once again get to hear from Diego Sánchez-Ramos, who all of last year served as an amazing co-host throughout the year, but today you're actually going to get to hear from him as a guest. So it's actually been roughly about a year since we last interviewed Diego, and today we're actually going to get to hear a little bit about him. There's a lot that happened within that year, whether it's been COVID, whether it's been experiences, whether it's been a college journey, and we can't just wait to hear from him. But before we start, let's go ahead and just start with a little bit of conocimiento, Diego. I know it's been a couple of episodes since you've been our co-host, but just reintroduce yourself. Who are you? Who do you represent? What's your purpose? Let's go ahead and just start there.
Thank you for that introduction. My name is Diego Sánchez-Ramos. I represent my dad, Hector, my mom, Lucy. I have a little sister named Sofia. I represent all my ancestors that came before me, especially my nana and my Papa Chuy, Abuelita Francis, and my tata. All very important to me. It's wonderful to be back. It's nice to be on the mic again. I realized I got demoted since I was last on, but but it's great to be back.
No, welcome back. And definitely not a demotion. Today, we would want to hear about the teachings that you have to share. And definitely next episode, we'll have you back as a co-host. But let's go ahead with your college journey. I know you're entering your second year, I think third semester, started college during COVID. Tell us a little bit about your experiences. What university are you attending? And how has your journey been there?
Well, currently, I am at the University of San Francisco. This is my fourth semester here now. It's a little bit different because last time I was in the dorms, but we had no online class, or all the classes were online. There was no in-person. There was barely anyone on campus. Now it's become more populated, so it's become a much more of like what you'd expect when you enroll in college.
Well, I'm glad you're definitely along in your journey about the midway point.
Yeah.
But let's go ahead. I know we've been in spaces all over through NCN. We've been in spaces in Retiros, at the Hombres Retiros down in Jolon. We've been at monthly circles with you. We've been through Joven Noble, the Joven Noble Youth Academy, at the retreats there. Thinking about all your times within the circle, what is one teaching that you want to highlight that maybe stands out to you the most, that maybe you want to share with our listeners today?
I would have to go with just the that every child is a blessing, right? Because that's one that's important to me very much, because I think it's important that every child knows that they are a blessing, especially because in times of COVID, right? We said this a year ago, we say this now, right? It's still difficult, right? So it's important that everyone knows that they are a blessing. So when children don't understand they are a blessing, that's a lot of times when those kind of mental health issues can kind of pop up. And that's a lot of times where it stems from, right? Because if you're struggling, right, you don't get to see your friends. It's hard to, school's difficult online. We understand that. It's difficult to do work, to do school online. And so then if you don't feel like you're a blessing, right, if the people who you are around all the time, right, your parents, your uncles, whoever's raising you, whoever you're with, whoever you're living with, and you don't feel like you're a blessing, it can be really difficult to kind of continue to do that online work, all that online school, whatever it is. So for me, letting everyone know they are a blessing is very, very important.
I agree. Especially right now when we're all disconnected a little bit, right? We're told to be safe and be distant physically, but how do we maintain that connection in different ways, spiritually, emotionally, mentally? So for someone that might be struggling with recognizing the sacredness that they have within themselves, what words of encouragement would you say? Because right now I heard you mention, sometimes our parents might struggle to remind us that. Sometimes our friends might struggle to remind us that. Sometimes people's actions might struggle to remind us that. How do we make sure that we remind ourselves when we're not getting those reminders from others?
I think a great way of reminding yourself, at least for me, right, is sitting in círculo, just kind of like hearing other people and understanding, right, everyone can be struggling, and just knowing that you're there for other people and they're also there for you. And so having that kind of like brick wall to help support you when maybe you don't feel like you're a blessing or you're struggling yourself, it's very important. And if you can't sit in círculo, or you're struggling in other ways and you don't want to do that, I think it's just sometimes it's just great to reach out, right? And I know it's difficult, especially when it's just like shooting people texts, but it's always important to just reach out and see how people are doing, right? Even if you're not struggling, make sure everyone else around you, shoot them a text, make sure they're doing okay.
Yeah, I think that's definitely important, the reaching out part, because I think sometimes within our culture, we've been taught to keep things in-house, right? And not share those outward. So I think that's important. Definitely reach out. Now, sticking with the circle concept, I know, even when I was a participant, one of the teachings that resonated with me the most was the concept of palabra, right? I think that was infused in almost every single circle. And we always came back to that concept of palabra. What does palabra mean to you?
So for me, I was kind of around palabra. I was taught about palabra from a very young age, the idea of just being honest and keeping your word. And for my dad, keeping his word was very important. I have a really vivid memory of one time we went out to breakfast and we were coming out of it, and there was a man who was asking for money, and so my dad gave him some money. And so he then went on to explain to me, right, because we didn't go to breakfast very often, but this was a restaurant near where we lived, and so he had seen this man before, and so he had offered him help before. But for my dad, what was important here was that, right, we always kind of focus on the negative of people, and so a lot of times the thought process when you see someone asking for this money, and I know this because I live in San Francisco right now, you see a lot of homeless people, a lot of people who are struggling, and the thought process is always like, oh, if I give them money, they're just going to go use it on drugs, use it on whatever, right? And so what we need is to teach people is that, like, people are really honest. People keep their word. People have palabra, right? Especially these people who struggle, right? I've talked to a couple of even in high school, years after this had occurred, right? I went to LA and I spent time with the homeless people. There was like the school sent us to LA and we spent time on Skid Row, right? And the people who lived there, right? Some of them were on drugs, but right, they weren't like these drug addicts who, that's all they wanted to do, right? These people wanted to turn their life around. They had honesty in their hearts. When they talked to us, they were honest about their problems and how they were trying to fix them. And so what I think was really resonated to me about palabra was the fact that sometimes in this world, it's like if you have money, you can get far. Mm-hmm. And if you're just kind of like, oh, I have money and you can trust me, a lot of times people will. But if you don't, then people will be like, nah, I don't trust your word, right? But I think it's important to understand that everybody has palabra and is capable of kind of keeping promises and keeping those promises, as well as being honest with themselves and you about how good they are to themselves, right? And if we're not treating people like they're blessings, and we're not saying like, oh, they don't have palabra because, they're struggling, they're this, they're that, whatever, right? If we don't believe people have palabra, can we really keep it ourselves? Can we really have our own palabra if we're just like, oh, that person can have palabra because, they're struggling right now? And I think that's really important to me, is understanding that you can have palabra, but you can't take it away from someone else, right? You can have it. And if someone says that, you have to kind of believe them too.
Yeah, and that's an important concept, right? No one can take your palabra away from you. They could take your money, they could take your home, they could take all of your possessions, they could take a lot of things from you. But one of the things that they cannot take from you is your palabra.
Yeah.
I like that. I like that you shared that. Now, you talked about your immersion trip down in LA in Skid Row. Talk a little bit about those experiences. Like, what have you done in terms of community work that you want to highlight for a second?
One of the big ones was that immersion trip. I had I had a lot of fun there. We went down. We spent a couple nights in the homeless shelter, sleeping there, as well as then serving kind of breakfast the next morning, because
Hmm.
there's like 6 or 7 homeless shelters slash like breakfast, lunch, food kitchens down there, because there's a large population of homeless people. And so
Hmm.
we spent about 4 days there, just kind of trying to serve them, just giving them food, passing out water, kind of walking around and understanding, right, past just, oh, these people are sleeping on the side and we need to move them, right, to like understand the people and the humanity that was struggling there. And then I think a kind of I don't want to say a forgotten part, but it was a less important part of the trip. But at least for me, it was still important. We ended up going to Boyle Heights, which was which has a lot of Latinos, but we ended up serving breakfast a couple days there at the parish to help the community. And so for me, that has been one of my favorite experiences.
Yeah, and I think it's important for us to always give back, right? I think sometimes when we look at certain parts of the community, we really focus on the things that are not desirable. Sometimes we focus, on the homeless population, the impact of gangs, the impact of poverty, and we forget, that there's still richness within that, and that there's still a lot of people that might be struggling, but they're blessing themselves. So let me ask you the following question: when you look at your community, whether it's a community that you live in, the community that you serve, or the community that you come from, what makes you most proud about your community when you look at it from the outside looking in?
I think for me, especially in San Francisco, because this is kind of a new community, right? Because I've been a part of kind of the USF community for 2 years now, but everything's been online, so it hasn't really felt like a community. But at least here at USF, I'm really proud of our community for just being incredibly open and welcoming to just about all people. For especially in this last year, with a lot of the Stop Asian Hate and the violence against the Asian populations, they've been incredibly outspoken about stopping Asian hate and making sure that our Asian brothers and sisters feel protected and they don't feel threatened.
Hmm.
And so I think all the communities I've been a part of, but especially here at San Francisco, I feel like they've been incredibly outspoken against the Asian hate that has happened in this country in the past year.
Hmm.
So that's something I'm proud of.
Yeah, and I like that you brought that up because I think it's important for us to come together, especially when it's people in our community that are being impacted. Like me, for example, I identify as an indigenous Mexicano, and I might not necessarily come from the Asian community, but when they hurt, I hurt, right? And I got people that I'm connected to that I consider friends and family that it was impacting them. They no longer felt safe even going to the grocery store. So how do we come together in a good way to make sure that they feel safe, to make sure that we feel safe, and to establish that unity? So thank you for that. Now, same question, but a little bit different. When you look at your culture, what are you most proud of, right? Because it's one thing for us when we live in a community, and there's a community that we connect to, but I think location, demographics versus culture are a little bit different. So when you look at your culture, what are you most proud of?
I think it has to be how far we've kind of come with like mental health, because I even remember like closer to when I was much younger, like of course I wasn't pressured like, oh, machismo, you got to keep it in, right? But i
Hmm.
do i do know that was kind of the mentality that was kind of taken over. It was, if you're a guy, kind of just suck it up, right? It's not
Hmm.
that bad. You can live through it. And so I think, see how far we've come to be supportive of not just men but all mental health services, but especially the fact that kind of we're working to get through that like stigma of mental health
Hmm.
in our community.
Yeah, and that whole like redefining masculinity, right?
Yeah.
I remember one of the first times that I heard my son Jerry talk, and I saw the tears coming from his eyes. I started crying, and I had no idea why I was crying, but for whatever reason, I just felt so comfortable to be able to release. And it was also an environment where I didn't feel like I was being judged. And I think that's probably the most important thing, that I'm able to be vulnerable. I'm able to shed some tears without having the fear of, is my masculinity going to get challenged? So I think that's important. You've been in circle with some of the other young folks like Ray and Juan, and just being able to see them express their emotions también, it gives us a little bit of agency, and it gives us a little bit of courage. So thank you for that. So we've been kind of in and out a little bit about your healing journey, right? You've talked about different instances where you've gotten teachings from maestros and things like that. Can you, for a second, just highlight a little bit of the struggles, right? Healing is not easy. It's not a linear process. It's a circular process, and you come in and out of it. Can you talk a little bit about what has been maybe a speed bump? What has been some obstacles that you've had to overcome? What have been some barriers that you've encountered within your healing journey?
For me, my healing journey, like everyone's, has been affected by COVID. I think I talked about that last time I was on the podcast. And I like to think of COVID like the big wall, right? There's a lot of small things like little rocks in your shoe that they're like the everyday stuff, right? COVID is the big picture. There are a lot of everyday. And so I want to touch on that stuff. It's stuff, for me, it's stuff like making sure that I eat at least try and eat 3 times a day, right? 3 full meals a day, making sure that your body is right. Because if your body is hurting, then it's going to affect the rest of your life. Same thing, making sure you're getting enough sleep, because sleep is incredibly important. And if you're not getting enough of it, it could really affect your work, your friendships, all that kind of things. And that's where I think I take the ideas of, the maestros, the ones that are much smarter than I am, and they say that, like, when you're hurting, everyone around you is hurting, right? So if you're right, if you're hungry, you're tired, right, you're struggling in that department, right, people around you are going to kind of feel that, and they're going to be affected, right? And if they're affected, right, that might bring them down a little bit. And so you making sure that you're okay is going to make sure that everyone around you, that you're doing everything you can so that people around you aren't hurting because you're hurting, right? And then that can help you address, right, if they're hurting, or if they need help, or if they're struggling. One of my favorite, I think it was Theo Jerry who said this to me the first time. He was like, if you yourself are struggling, you're not going to be able to help someone else who's struggling, because it just doesn't work that way, right? You'll just kind of end up hurting each other, because both of you are struggling and none of you are kind of in that right mind to get right. And so to help others and make sure everyone is kind of staying on track, you have to make sure that you're okay too, right? And so it's past like COVID and like having to deal with online and all that, and just kind of like everyday stuff sometimes.
Yeah, and I think you touched on 2 things too that I want to highlight. One is that interconnection, that when you hurt, we hurt. When you heal, we heal. And I think that's important, because we don't take that into account sometimes. People think that sometimes your troubles are very individualistic. And, the second thing is that you're talking big picture COVID, that we were only supposed to shut down for 2 weeks and then come back to normal. A year and a half later, we're still in it, right? And it's resurging. And that's biggest picture, and causing anxiety on all levels. But then there's also still daily struggles that we might encounter as individuals that other people might not know. And sleep is one of them. I know a lot of people have an anxiety where they can't sleep. They're most awake at night. And how do we, make sure that we support them to make sure that they get the sleep and the rest and everything they need, so that all our circles could be good. So I think both of those are really important, that interconnection, but also the individual struggles that might not come out collectively. You mentioned, hearing from Maestro Jerry, hearing from your dad, hearing from the men in the Círculo. So let's stay there for a second. We talked about the obstacles. We talked about what does healing mean to you? What does palabra mean to you? But who has taught you that? Who has walked with you in your journey? So if you could highlight maybe 2 people that have walked with you in your healing journey, who are those people and why are those people important to you?
The 2 have to be, for me, it's my Theo Jerry, Jerry Theo, and Macedonio. They're like 2 sides of the same coin, right? I think of Theo Jerry as like almost a Yoda, right? He just has like all these like wise words and wise stories, and right, every time you listen to him talk, you kind of take something away from it. Like I think I've heard him tell the same story. Like, because I remember there was a point, I think I was like 7th or 8th grade, where my dad would take me to like a ton of like workshops, because we would have random days off. And so he would take me to these workshops, sometimes with Theo Jerry, sometimes with Theo Mario. But I would always listen because I didn't have anything else to do. So I'd always listen. But I would hear the same stories, because a lot of times there were similar workshops. So I would hear these same stories. And I remember I heard this, I can't remember the story, but I heard it like 4 times. But each time, right, you kind of understand something different. And it's crazy how the same story can apply differently, because each room of people will react to it differently, because they all have different kind of views on or messages. They all take something different away from it.
Yeah.
And so seeing just how different the same story can be, and how well he's able to engage people in the healing, and kind of getting them to understand that, like, that healing is not just, it's not a linear thing, it's circular, and kind of almost selling them on that idea. And as well as then taking them on that healing journey it's fun to see, it's fun to be a part of. It's just, that's why I think of him as like kind of like the Yoda, right? He's always talking about wise words, and you always learn something new. And for me, then Macedonio kind of is different. Not that he's not wise, and he might listen to this and be like, "Oh, he's not. He doesn't think I'm wise." No, I think he's a wise guy. I think he's a funny guy. And for me, what was important was, like I said, a lot of times the círculos that I went to were like, it felt like my dad's, right? Because all these people, like, he knows them, they're his friends. And so there was always, for me, a struggle to find, my círculo and my kind of circle and my own place. And so I think going on that retreat with the people from San Diego, Colorado, as well as like Ray, Jose, all them, that was kind of finding my circle. And I think Mase was a really important part of that, because he was there and he kind of like helped walk us through. Because whenever I go to the big círculo, it's always, or the big retiro, it's always like, the old guys are always serious. It's always, and what I found, right, is like, you don't always got to be serious, right? They're serious, but that doesn't mean we have to be, right? As a young, like, I'm 19 right now. I'm going on 20. I don't have to be too serious just yet. So him showing us that he kind of helped me carve my own space for myself in our círculo, and it helped me develop my own circle. And now I have that circle, right? And that's mine. And so that was for me, that was really important. And so that's why I think those two, they were both really important in my healing journey.
That 2 parts to that coin, right? It's the same coin, 2 parts to it. And sometimes we do forget to laugh. We forget that there's healing medicine in that laughter. So I think when you have a Mase that's connected, that's grounded, that's culturally able to walk you through this journey like no other people can, and is also able to allow your own personality and your own humor to be inserted, it's definitely unique, and you appreciate that. So I was in that same retiro with Mase, and hearing, his way of telling stories, his way of inserting humor, his way of making connections culturally and things like that. It makes you laugh, it makes you cry, and it makes you do all of it. Sometimes to the point where you're like, what am I doing? I'm crying and laughing at the same time. So I definitely appreciate that. Healing, though, I like how you described that healing could be a little bit different for everybody. And that sometimes healing can be very serious, and addressing very serious experiences, very traumatic experiences. But also healing can be, filled with joy. It could be filled with laughter. It could be filled with good relationships. It could be filled with all of the goodness in the world. How would you describe healing just in general? Like, what is your definition of healing from your own experiences?
For me, healing is, well, when it's said, it almost sounds like, healing, oh, you're just feeling better. And I think you're right. It's very different for everybody. Like, for me, I like to kind of diffuse things with laughter. So for me, healing, like, it helps if I'm kind of like, I'm a little funny, I make some jokes. So that kind of keeping it light helps me helps me in that healing journey because it helps me feel comfortable to share, right? But I also understand people just want, like, I can understand if people just want like a serious saying, like, here we're going to come talk about serious topics. And so that's why I think it's hard to just kind of broadly define healing, because it can look so different for so many people. But for me, healing is just being able to go and express your feelings, whatever they may be, whether you're really struggling or whether you are in a decent place, right? Being able to go express your feelings and feel heard, right? And have people listen to you, and then you can listen to them and kind of help them along with their own healing journey. And so I think for me, that's what healing is, the being able to express those emotions, good or bad.
Yeah, and being heard and being able to listen to other people. I like that, because I remember sitting in circle with Mario, and Mario saying, one of the biggest responsibilities when you cross that bridge is that you now got to come back and walk with that next person, right? So sometimes you're the one that is unloading, and you're the one that is sharing, and then sometimes you're the one that is listening, and sometimes what you process is equally as important than what you shared, if not more important, right? So I definitely like that. So coming up to the next question, and this is a shout out to AB. AB, this is probably his favorite question to ask the guest, is if you had the microphone and you had the spotlight, what is one issue that you would want to bring light to? So no pressure.
No,
one
no
microphone.
Pressure, just one just one thing of all the things, just one.
Just one out of all the things in the world. And you could thank AB for that the next time that you speak to him.
I will definitely. Oh, man. I think right now, with Omicron kind of coming, I think it's just really important right now that people just get vaccinated, right? That's less of a mental health thing, and right now more of just like a physical health thing, right? I was talking about sleep. I was talking about eating, right? You need to make sure that your body is right to make sure that you can kind of keep your mind right. And so I think it is just get vaccinated, right? Omicron is a scary COVID variant. It's going to be devastating if people who aren't vaccinated stay unvaccinated, right? Please get the vaccine. Please wear a mask. Please be safe. Social distance. Just be careful. It can be very dangerous.
Yeah. No, and that's true. And I think, there's a lot of people that are questioning the validity of the vaccine. How can you have the vaccine and still get COVID and all of this stuff, right? And I was one of those people too that at first I didn't want to get the vaccine until my parents got COVID. And then I'm like, okay, maybe I got to take this a little bit more serious. I got to be careful, that I only go out when I need to. I got to be careful that I'm making sure I'm sanitizing things and taking care of my body, because my body could be strong enough to deal with it maybe. But what if I get someone within my family sick that their immune system is not up to par and their immune system is not ready to face that?
Yeah.
So I think that if anything COVID has shown us is that this world is interconnected, right? So we do have to be safe about that. So thank you for sharing your views on the vaccine and making sure that your circles are safe too. Now, this is your favorite question that you've always asked everybody whenever we've interviewed anybody on the podcast. What advice do you want to give to the next generation? So normally you're on this side of it asking.
Yeah, I don't
to
have
the
to.
other person. Now it's your turn to answer. What advice do you want to give to the next generation? You're young. You're 19, 20. You're definitely, still in those teenage years. But there's a lot of wisdom that you have within your body, within your experiences. So what advice do you want to give to that next generation?
Ooh. Well, I have what I'm going to say. I'm just saying, as homework, those who haven't listened should go listen to see because I think I had to answer this one of my first podcasts. So whatever I said then, keep doing that, right? Go do your homework. Go keep doing that. But I'm going to add on to it and say that I think it's really important that you kind of, and this for me was really important, was the kind of finding your own círculo, finding your own space, your own place, and just kind of making it yours, because it can be easy to just kind of blow it off if it's like, oh, that's I don't really talk to many of the people from there. I don't do this, I don't do that, right? It can be easy to blow it off if you don't like, if it doesn't feel like home. And so for me, for the next generation, it's find your people, find your circle, find whatever it is, right? And make it your home, make it available for you so that you can be comfortable sharing your emotions in those circles. Because if you can build that space for yourself, you will be able to then show that to the next generation to then, so when once we're older, right, once we've created our space, we've had our space, when the next generation kind of comes, we show like, all right, this is how you kind of create that space for yourself, and then they have that space for themselves, and then they can teach it to the next and then the next, and it kind of just having that ability to kind of build that circulo for yourself is so important, because it would help the next generation, it helps you, and it kind of keeps this cycle of healing going.
And that right there is the equation to intergenerational healing.
Yeah.
Right? Which is one of the projects that we worked on too, a couple of summers ago, when we talked about, we were so focused on intergenerational trauma, and we wanted to define it. We wanted to hear everything. And I remember you were one of those folks. You and Ray both said, you guys keep talking about intergenerational trauma, but what about intergenerational blessings? What about all the things that got poured in? Can we talk about that? Like, why do we always have to be sad? So talk about that a little bit before we close up. What is intergenerational blessings to you?
Intergenerational blessings are just kind of, well, I think just things like the círculo are those blessings kind of coming down, because they're passed down to us so that we can better ourselves and keep ourselves right.
Mm-hmm.
And so while there are a long list of intergenerational blessings, I think the most important has to, at least for me, and I think for you maybe too, is that círculo, is that space that we've been kind of brought into, and now that we're kind of teaching the teachings of being able to have that space and express yourself there, is just such an important intergenerational blessing. Because you're right? You don't always got to be sad. We don't always have to cry. It doesn't always have to be, super serious. We can have fun. We can laugh, right? And so it's important to also kind of look at that too. Look at what we have gained, right? With the great things that have happened to us, as well as kind of, the struggles we have. You can't always look at the bad. You also have to look at the good, because if you always look at the bad, right, you'll never see the good. So important to look at both of them. And so I think the best blessing that we have is the ability to look at both of them in the círculo.
Mm-hmm. And that's true balance right now. So thank you for sharing all that you've shared. We're going to continue to hear from you throughout the year as you're going to shift back to being a co-host and interviewing some of the young leaders, whether it's from New York, from New Orleans, from Texas, from California, wherever the youth, there's youth all over the nation doing a lot of great work. So we thank you for all that you've done here within California, and we continue to have you as a co-host, and can't wait to interview A.B. Ozuna next. But as we close up, is there any closing remarks, any last minute teachings or anything that you want to share with our listeners?
Well, at first, I just want to say thank you for having me back. It's great to be back. Can't wait to be a co-host again, get re-promoted. And just to all our listeners, thank you. Thank you for sticking with us through COVID. It's impossible without you, or else we would just be crazy people talking into nothing. So thank you for listening. Thank you for having me.
Crazy people talking into nothing. So thank you again. There's a lot that you shared today. Healing doesn't always have to be sad. Healing doesn't always have to be hard. Healing looks different for everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You talked about finding your own circle, making it your own, feeling comfortable enough to share, feeling comfortable enough to cry. As men, as women, as non-binary folks, as, anybody who was within the spectrum, being able to feel comfortable within yourself, love yourself, and all of that. So I thank you for how you share your wisdom. I thank you for really connecting to the circle and really connecting to this podcast, and for all of the beautiful teachings that you're going to share in the future. So with that, thank you. It was a pleasure sitting with you again. We welcome you back. And for all our listeners, please tune into the next episode. In the meantime, definitely follow us. Listen to the Healing Generation podcast on your favorite platform. Make sure you follow us on Facebook under the National Compadres Network. Twitter and Instagram under La Cultura Cura. And we can't wait to hear from more of our youth leaders throughout the nation. So with that, many blessings to you, your family, and your community. We can't wait to be in space with you all again. Gracias.
For more information about Healing Generations and the Healing Generations Institute, visit nationalcompadresnetwork.org and be sure to subscribe to stay up to date with our new releases.